Well, that's a start because we're like running way past realtor time even. So, all right. Thanks for showing up. Had some technical issues, so we're not going to be able to stream this to anybody, but we're recording it, so talk loud if you have a question. This is Matt and Carrie from Highland Title. I've been working with Carrie for silencing the phone now. Jesus.
Your whole career?
19 years now. Carrie has been my escrow officer for all of that time. She's been in a variety of places. I don't even remember the time. I know where Carrie goes. But when I asked Carrie if we could do a class, she's like, I'm a lousy teacher, so I'm going to bring Matt.
Pretty much.
So they're here to kind of talk to us about title, particularly the title report and what it says and what it doesn't say and what we should be looking for. Because as agents, a lot of times, we know we receive that and then we don't actually do anything with it. We send it to our client and they don't look at it and nobody looks at it, and then we end up 2 days before closing with an issue that somebody should have seen somewhere. Usually you guys though. Carrie doesn't miss things. It's part of why we've worked together for so long.
We bring it to your attention.
So I'm just gonna roll it over to you. You can stand or sit or do whatever it is you want that's most comfortable to present. I'm gonna keep an eye on this here. And I'm gonna yell at the dog, so sorry everybody.
Yeah. But we'll
He's calming down.
so yeah, we're both escrow officers with the title company, Highland Title. I'm not sure if you guys have ever done a deal with this. If you have, awesome. Would love to know.
You
feedback
should.
on this. Yeah. Like the most important thing for a title company that is always at the top is that your deal closes. And a title company basically follows instructions. So I hear you guys talking about an addendum, and an addendum is just additional instructions that's gonna have that $10,000 earnest money either on a seller or a buyer's side credit. And then we just take all the instructions from any real estate contract and follow those, and then that's how we do a closing. What I do mostly is I'm a marketer and an escrow officer, so that means that I'm licensed to actually do signings. So if you're like, hey, Matt, we've got this seller that can't come to you and we want to use you, but they're in Ogden, then I'll just like drive to their house and do signatures, you know? Same with purchases too. We just, at this point in my career, it's how I built my business is I just go to where people tell me that they need signatures, and so that's what I do. I've always got a pen, and I've always got my notary stamp with me too, so like it's just being prepared for that stuff. And if anybody had a contract that they sent to me, I would just send those to Carrie, and Carrie does all the work on those things and make sure that that transaction's ready to go. And we also have quite a few people. So the PR, do you guys know what a PR is? Like a preliminary title report or a title commitment? So
What's your last name, Matt?
Griff. That's just what everybody calls me. Everybody just calls me Griff too.
Calls you Griff?
Yeah.
Because you
my
have a
wife-
last nameable last name.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Even my wife calls me Griff. So like it's weird when people say Matt. I'm like,
I've always called you just Matt.
I know. There's very few people in my life that call me Matt. My mom and Carrie. So it's very similar. But I mean, just because again, nerd stuff, I brought a few different PRs. I brought one for a commercial listing, and then I brought one for a listing that has nothing on it. So those fortunate people in the world that don't actually have like a mortgage, that lists nothing on it to just see what a very basic one looks like. And then I also have a really difficult one that has a bankruptcy.
And judgments and
Yeah.
all kinds of stuff.
Oh.
But anyway, I'll pass these things
That's the
around.
kind you don't want to see, right?
No.
Correct.
That's why on the
Correct.
very first page of this is the email that our assistant, Jessica, her daughter actually, sends out to a real estate agent that's like, hey, we finished the search on this property.
Here's your
And I want you to
document.
know, yeah, here's the whole preliminary title report and the commitment, but there is a bankruptcy and we need the information for the bankruptcy on this. And then there's also some judgments. So it's like, we need full social security numbers. We need all these things from your client to be able to get this property sold. And so the big thing about a preliminary title report, when you get this from us in email form, nobody ever prints these things out, but you also get that letter on the front that says, here's your title commitment. Here are the things that are listed on that title commitment. And the things that we need from you that you can pass on to your real estate or to your client. Usually one of them is what we call this payoff form. And on any sale, unless you're just a free and clear mortgage that doesn't have anything listed on the property, this is something that every title company, if you guys ever done a deal and ever had a sale, you're getting something like this from a title company that's like, put down the mortgage information. And this is what you give to your client so they can write the mortgage information down. If there's an HOA, who they get their water, sewer, garbage information from. It's got the line for social security number, and then they have to physically like wet sign these things. This is what we can send to a bank.
And
And
talk
then-
on their behalf.
Yeah,
Mm.
and because people will sometimes say to like an agent, well, I can look on the computer right now and I can see that like my balance is $484,272.50, but that's not what the payoff is. And so we as a title company, we request that payoff. They're already coming to take it away. I don't blame them. I know. Maybe it's just like something to keep you guys awake too. But like those are things that we as a title company have to request to make sure that we're getting that payoff with their instructions to that bank. And we're getting the HOA information that we can pass on to the new buyers or the sellers to make sure that everything is taken care of on a transaction. Because title companies, we do two things. We insure on a sale, and then we insure on a purchase, and we'll flip you off. So when you're gonna sell a house, like if you were to sell your house in Utah, you provide the insurance policy that goes to the new buyer. That says that everything on this is free and clear. That's a term that we use. There's no mortgage. There's no person that fixed the roof and never paid for it. Like all those things we can see when we do a search on a property, and then we make sure that everything is all paid off. And then that insurance policy goes to that new buyer that just says everything on there is all free and clear. So if somebody comes knocking on the door in the next 6 months and it's like, hey man, I fixed their carpet and they owe me $3,000, then you can call somebody like me and then I can call and yell at people because something wasn't taken care of. But that owner's policy that you give to your buyer when you're selling your house, it just states that everything is at zero.
We're ensuring their ownership,
Yeah.
is what the owner's policy does, is you're ensuring the ownership of the property to your new buyer, that they're getting it without all of the stuff from any prior owners to that time when they take ownership of the property.
What's like the term for it? It's like transferring free and clear,
Mhm.
something like that.
Yeah.
Is transferring the title free and clear.
Yes.
Okay, and then okay, that was
Yeah, that's section
Yeah.
6 in your contract,
Yeah.
is where it's talking about that their issue, that your seller is getting the property free and clear to the new buyer without any encumbrances from their ownership of the property prior to.
And what does that entail? The structure, the land, all the above? If there's no survey, how do you determine that?
So that's basically determined by the plat map. So that, you're ensuring ownership of that parcel. So whatever is on the parcel of the property is your ownership that they're ensuring,
According to county tax records?
according to the records of the plat map and the records of the county tax records as well. Correct. So if there's any like crossover of boundary lines or anything like that, or people are selling a portion of their property, that's where a survey comes in. And in order for them to change the legal description with the county, that's where you would have a survey that would happen on whatever you're selling as a part of that property. Does that make sense?
Very good. Title insurance, I mean, you're starting at zero. And so it's different than any other insurance where you pay for your car insurance each month, hoping in the case that you don't get an accident, it's a one-time fee. And that basically starts at zero. And then anything you add on top of that is on you after that. But you're getting a property that starts at zero. That's what you're selling.
Yeah, meaning that you have a free and clear property, that you have no encumbrances from any prior owner.
Yeah.
And generally those go back to the plat, when the plat map is recorded to create those subdivisions.
And if you're getting one, why does the lender need one too?
Okay, very good. Yeah, so that's the other one.
Because the lender's policy is issuing position to the lender. So the lender's policy is only good for as long as that loan that's being taken out is in place. So whether they sell the property and it's paid off, they pay it off themselves, or they refinance, as soon as that loan has been paid off, that policy is null and void. Whereas with an owner's policy, that owner's policy is in place as long as you own the property.
Yeah, but why does the lender need one if you have one? Just for lien position?
Yes.
Lien position, you're insuring position with the lender's policy, you're issuing ownership with an owner's policy. Thanks.
So yeah, you're getting a mortgage for $200,000 and that gets recorded into the county. That states that your loan is in, first position. So if there's ever bankruptcy and people gotta start getting paid back, your loan gets paid back and then cars and credit cards and things like that. But first position, that's an insurance policy that goes to the lender. So yeah, you're getting a borrower that's buying a house for $500,000 and their loan's $400,000. Yeah, that $400,000 is recorded onto the property as a lien, a deed of trust.
And that's what we're ensuring is the lender's lien position.
Yep.
Which is why you can do a split closing in the state of Utah, is because we're required to issue a policy, whether it's an owner's policy or a lender's policy. And so that's why your buyers and sellers are able to choose which title companies they want to use during the transaction.
So our whole job is to be I don't even know what she does. But my whole job is to make sure that I have relationships with real estate agents and lenders so that when they do have a buyer or a seller or somebody's gonna do a refinance, they just think of me and they just text me an address and say, hey, can you do a PR on this? And that is the PR that basically states everything on the property. We always like to get listings as early as possible. So yeah.
Sorry, I'm laughing because the number of rush orders I've sent to Carrie
Listen,
are many.
we can accommodate that too, and it's okay. Like sometimes you
Yeah,
get
but I
a
don't want to
property-
sell you guys on the inconvenience stuff. Like,
We have title searchers that work from home that we can just reach out immediately and they can do a search for us. And sometimes it takes a couple hours. When it's really busy, like the past couple of years, getting searches back in 24 hours was a little bit tight, but we could always just kind of like sweet talk them and buy them lunch to just get us things turned around in a couple of hours. What that means is like somebody on Friday night says, okay, great, let's list this property. And then by Saturday, someone's already got it under contract and due diligence is due on Monday. And that means that we need that property address. We have to search the property and then get this to you. That states everything on the property by Monday afternoon at 5 o'clock when the due diligence deadline is up, so that you're ready to actually sell that property. It's ready to be insured. So
That's a hell of a deadline.
it is. People do that. We've got one that we just cannot educate this client to just be like, quit waiting until you're under contract to send us this thing, especially when you've got a cash buyer that would buy it in 2 days, you know? And so yeah, whenever you've got somebody that's potentially listing, I know we always don't want to do deals that end up not closing or end up not being able to work with. But I mean, even if you've got a potential listing, and you're pretty sure you're feeling pretty confident, send it to us, and then at least that's another thing that you can present to your client. Like, hey, the title company is actually ready to go. I just had them search this thing and make sure that we know exactly what's going on. Looks like your home is in a trust. So we need to have that trust so that we know who can sign for it. You know, it lists that you have a first and a second mortgage. I don't have a second mortgage. Yeah, maybe you've got a HELOC or something with a zero balance.
Or a
But
lot
you
of
still need to
Or
get
a
that
lot
paid
of
off.
people have done when they did the, with all of the stuff with COVID, and they did, I can't remember what the word is, the forbearance.
Yeah.
Well, those forbearances, they think that they don't owe that money anymore. No, they went behind there and they put a deed for that amount that they have put off. So there's no payment on it, there's no interest on it, but it still has to be paid when you're selling the property.
Which brings us to the payoffs. Sometimes we can get a payoff back in a day. So
Sometimes
which
it's
means
7 to 10 days.
yeah, which means like, oh, you've got a mortgage, okay, yeah, write the information on the mortgage so the title company can get that information for the payoff. But on a NOVAD one, on some of these forbearance ones, yeah, I mean, I've seen them take up
7
to like
10 days.
7 to 10 days. I've seen like USDA loans that can take up to 28 days. And so we always like to have as much information at the beginning of a transaction as possible. And so we can just
Plus
kind
it
of
makes
work on
you guys
the
look
check.
like rock stars to your
Yeah,
sellers that, hey, we've already got this information and we're ready to go.
That's it.
So is it better to get a payoff when you order the PR or when it's under contract?
More when it's under contract, but if you can gather the information from your seller at the time of your listing, it means you don't have to go back to them and ask them for additional information because you've already got it
Right,
prior to you're finished with your appointment
okay.
on your listing. It just makes it easier.
So we should get that title, that
Mhm.
sheet, right off the bat and have that all completed.
I think that's something that you would just put in like a listing presentation if you're really getting it listed on the
And that's,
on the
to
MLS.
clarify, that is for sellers, right?
Yes,
Yeah.
it
For
is.
sellers,
Yeah.
It is.
Got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, not so much on your buyer's side.
Yeah.
Unless your buyer, for some reason that they're not aware of, they have a judgment or something, that would have to be addressed once we got the title report back. Because sometimes there's a tax lien or a judgment or similar names, we would need to get their social security numbers, their dates of birth, in order to clear it or say, hey, this is your borrower's, how are we going to address that prior to?
Would we know about that when they go through the pre-approval process because the lenders are?
Not necessarily.
Okay, so you even, like, part of buyer consultation would be like, do you have any judgments or?
Right, and most lenders generally ask that
Yeah.
question, but when they're pulling their credit report, a judgment may or may not show up on their credit report, but it's filed with the county. And so when we do our judgment search, we're looking specifically for the borrower's names. And if there's a similar name, like if you have a John Smith, there's a lot of John Smiths out there. Whether or not that is your party or not, that's where we would need that additional information for your buyer in order to get that cleared off and out of the way for your transaction. And
Does clearing stuff like that take a while or?
sometimes, depends on what it is. He did mention the bankruptcy, so have you guys ever had a transaction that a bankruptcy was involved? Have you? So in order for a property that is tied to a bankruptcy, you have to have the trustees' approval in order for them to sell that property. And that is a process of about 30 days. So that's another beneficial if you have a listing and you pull that title report prior to your before you going under contract, you're gonna know, okay, you guys have a bankruptcy. And sometimes they're not always 100% upfront that they have a bankruptcy. Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
At the time that you're meeting with them, because a lot of people are embarrassed about that.
I
But-
had one try to get cash outside of closing, so it wouldn't go to the bankruptcy.
Yeah, that's, no, that's fraud. We don't wanna do that.
Sometimes for sale by owners are dangerous like that, just
Yeah.
kind of throwing that out there.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that is a process. You have to work with whoever their bankruptcy attorney is in order to start that process. You have to be approved by the trustee to be able to represent the borrowers to sell that property.
Before you even put it up on MLS, you have to get all that sorted, right?
Not
Ideally.
necessarily,
Ideally.
but in order for you,
Yeah.
so if you know you have that bankruptcy, you're not going to have a cash buyer come in and close in 10 days. You're gonna have to be more realistic with that timeline as far as your settlement deadline goes out, because you're gonna have a minimum of 30 days. And a lot of times the bankruptcy attorneys are not necessarily always motivated in the best interest of their clients. And so sometimes that can delay, because without that trustee's approval to sell that property, you cannot move forward with that property.
So like best practices, it sounds like is as soon as that listing appointment is over, you order the title report, or I mean, even prior to that.
Even prior to,
If
like,
you think you
if
have
you're
it.
pretty sure that they're gonna go with you for the listing, we certainly could get that started for you so that you can go in with that prior to. And then Matt also has the ability to do the property profiles, right?
Yeah.
I mean, they give some information, not a ton, but.
most of the stuff, I'm sorry.
Uh-huh.
I mean, like a property most of those things you guys probably do on your software that you guys can pull. But I mean, yeah, I can look up an address and pull like weird demographics and all sorts of like 80 pages of everything associated with the property and the neighborhood and all that stuff. So,
Well, yeah, and those things, like, moving into the market we're moving into, where we have longer times on the market, that
Yeah.
information can be a lot more valuable, right?
Yeah.
The market we've been in, where properties sell in less than 2 weeks, they go under contract, that's not normal. You know, and it didn't give a lot of people any time to actually market properties, right? Moving into what we're doing next, you actually have to learn how to market a property, you know, and that involves knowing some of these things about these property profiles. I mean, you guys couldn't, title companies couldn't do them for a minute, what I understood, or
You know, it changes all the time, but now that we're able to do property profiles, if you've got a listing, you know, and you wanna do a search of like 200 properties around that listing so that you can send a mailer to them, or just market to them. I mean, those are things that
A
we
lot
can
of the
provide
title
with
companies
too.
don't offer that anymore, but that is
Yeah.
still a product that we do
Yeah.
have available to us.
And I mean, I can give you a spreadsheet of that. I can't supply you with an actual label that you can take and put on there because, you know, we're not supposed to do things like that. You know, we're not supposed to make your car payment each month. You know, we can give you a pen and a notepad, you know,
Really
things like
like
that, yeah. You know,
Right.
there's some interesting things of what title companies were allowed to do up until, you know, that 2008 mark, but now it's fairly regulated. Same with our fees too, you know, I mean, it's a relationship-based business that we're all in, and our fees are just as competitive with any other title company, you know. The policies that we write on, Stewart Title, I'm not sure if you ever heard of Stewart or First American, and it's basically like having the difference between Allstate, State Farm, and Geico. We just try to find what would be the most economical policy, and then it's just our closing cost. Policies are,
I mean, we have some wiggle room in order to kind of adjust our fees to try to be competitive, but overall, we still have to charge something. We
Yeah.
can't do it for free.
it's illegal to work for free for an
Correct.
insurance company.
Correct.
So, and which does bring up, you know, always a touchy thing, you know, I mean, people wanna find the most economical thing for their clients, and yet, you know, sometimes
Sometimes you're
$25,
paying for the service that
yeah,
you're getting.
and sometimes
Yeah.
$25 on a $500,000 transaction will make or break it, you know? So if there is something that needs to be worked with, or there's something that we can do to help with, we certainly can, because we don't want any real estate agent ever cutting their fees. You know, we don't necessarily like to
If
cut
we're
our
talking
fees, but like,
$100, I mean,
yeah.
that's something maybe we can work with, or $25 or whatever. But we try to be as competitive as possible with our fees
Sure.
where we can.
I
And
can,
those
I can attest to that.
those policies too, the owner's policy when you're selling is based on the property that you're selling, so
The purchase price.
yeah, so if you're selling it and it sells for $600,000, we're basing it off of a chart that says, hey, for this amount, this is the insurance policy rate. And then for the lenders, that lender policy, that's based on the loan amount that they're getting to, so they're kind of standard fees that way. And
So the seller's purchasing the title insurance for the buyer,
Yes.
and that is based on the entire purchase price, whereas the one that the buyer is buying for the lender is only based on the loan
Correct.
price, which
Yep.
makes sense.
Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And there is a discount for the lender's policy because an owner's policy is being issued.
Huh.
Just so you know.
That's cool.
So-
How
so
do you
they-
know about that? You just say like.
It's, the underwriters all have that already based. They're assuming that if there is a purchase that, that there is an owner's policy and a lender's policy being issued. And so the lender's policy is automatically discounted for your buyer. So not only is it based off of their loan amount instead of the purchase price, there is a discount from that owner's policy because both policies will be being issued.
So the underwriter addresses the
Yeah,
issue? Okay.
That's what the filed rates that are filed with the state.
Have you guys ever, is anything illegal for a buyer to be like, no, don't worry about title insurance?
Okay,
Is that
now,
even legal?
Good luck with that.
yeah, I don't know if that's,
I obviously would never suggest that, like,
right.
That's like
Well, most
saying, let me
lenders-
grab your purse and just run down the
right,
street.
I mean, I've heard horror stories, so like,
Really?
I know, but I don't know, maybe they.
I
don't
would
want the
never
house or-
encourage a borrower to accept a property without having an owner's policy being issued because they're giving up their protection.
Yes.
Totally.
Is it legal?
They're,
Yes.
It
It
is
is.
legal?
Should
Okay.
you ever do it? No.
Right, right.
here are the
Because
very
you're
few
hanging your borrower
circumstances.
out to
Yeah.
dry essentially by
With
not
like all
having
the
an
checks
owner's.
and balances that happened after 2008,
Yeah.
I was like curious if you could even do it then, like if you could
Yeah.
even not have.
So
Listen,
let's,
it does list on a CD that an owner's policy is optional, which it is very frustrating to see that and have people question that. Why am I paying $2,700 for an owner's policy? Well, it's basically because your buyer is not gonna buy a property that you're not saying is insured.
well,
The
and-
times that I have worked on that, there's only been a few, and it's where the son is buying from the parents. And the parents are basically selling. I know, listen, no, and sometimes the parents are savvy enough to go, you know what, listen, I make the mortgage payment, that's all there is on there, there's nothing else that's owed on this thing, I'm not gonna do an owner's policy to my son, I don't need to spend another $2,800 doing this owner's policy. Well, then his son, or daughter, whatever, would have to sign saying that they're not receiving an owner's policy, and in those family situations, I've done them a few times, it is what it is. But in any other situation, I would
As long as
never,
they have consent.
Well,
right,
plus,
Informed consent, I guess.
plus
they would
that
have to sign
verbiage
it.
in that language, in the software, the state of Utah is different than other states, and most software is used all across the United States. And so in other states, yes, the owner's policy very much so is optional. And in California, the buyer pays for their owner's policy. So they pay both the
And the
owner's
lender?
and the lender's policy.
Damn.
That's right.
So depending on which
Should I
state.
have a stick those guys have?
They do.
Yeah.
Buyers in
Plus their title
California.
fees are a lot more expensive than they are here. But the other thing is your guys' purchase contract, the state purchase contract states that an owner's policy has to be purchased
Part of the contract.
as part of your purchase
Yeah.
contract. So even though that verbiage is there that it's optional, in the state of Utah, it is not optional per your contract.
Okay.
Pretty good. I did a closing for a lender that had a borrower in Georgia. I said that I would do this remote closing for him just as a notary. And like seeing how their CD and the fees that were listed on that settlement statement for that purchase in Georgia, yeah, there was a document that said like, as the buyer, I am purchasing my own owner's policy. And then they have an attorney draw up all the documents, and it's just interesting, like fees. Utah's actually really good with their fees, and like you don't have to use an attorney. But an owner's policy is required, you know.
For the rep seat.
Per
the
your
reps,
contract, yeah. So you'd actually have to have the buyer identified in your contract that they are
That's
not
on the
requiring the
addendum.
seller to pay
Interesting.
that. And then of course you've got seller financing and all of that. That also can play into what type of policy a title company is going to issue during the transaction as well. Because if it's seller financing, it's really hard to issue a lender's policy, so they have to pay for an owner's policy, because in order for the title company to do the transaction, to have any funds flow through our trust account, they have to have a policy issued, otherwise we're in trouble with the state.
Look at this is some deep stuff we're getting into here.
And this is Carrie who said like, I'm not very good at
I know,
teaching
man's
things.
falling asleep, don't blame it.
That's my seat.
I'm
No,
like
it's-
fascinated.
yeah. It's pretty interesting, but basically, like, it's just all gonna
Being a
break
title
down
nerd's
to-
really not that bad.
I know, yeah.
I
That's why we do that
thought,
for
this
this
will
day.
all leave my head
That's
as soon as
right.
I walk out of here.
Yeah.
It's okay, there's a video, it'll be on the
That's
YouTube
okay.
channel.
Even though we're
That's a good-
doing the
yeah.
same thing on every single transaction, every transaction can be very, very different. Depends on what's on the property, depends on what you're dealing with your buyer and your sellers, depending on what type of transaction you're doing. It can be very complicated or it can be very simple. It just really depends on what you have come in. Do you have a solid buyer? Do you have a solid seller? You know, it can really get complicated or it can be really simple. It just depends.
Do you have any recommendations for a buyer in a seller finance contract? Like how do I, as a buyer, keep my house protected from the seller doing something nefarious during the seller?
Well, when you're
finance
doing seller financing, in most cases, the buyer is taking full ownership of the property, which is why that owner's policy is being issued at that time.
contract?
And so
That's pretty
the
risk.
the risk is more for the seller to make sure that the buyer follows through on their portion of the contract, which I'm sure you guys have heard of escrow specialists before, where they help with gathering payments and the such. So it
And-
really depends on how educated your seller is,
Well, if they're
as well as
doing,
your buyer.
if they're doing like a deed in escrow, don't. That's, Like that's the problem. Like sellers can cause problems if you're doing a deed in escrow as opposed to actually recording the deed.
And escrow specialties will not take a job if the contract pays less than the underlying mortgage.
Well, yeah.
I
Ask me
believe
how I
so.
know.
Because.
But they are the only
Yeah,
they're the only game in town.
they really are the only game in
But
town for that
they
type
just
of
won't do it
Yeah.
if it's a
If
negative
it's
balance.
negative balance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because that's really making it, they're taking on a lot of liability by
I can tell you, if I was them, I also wouldn't do it. So.
Right,
Cash buyers also, in Utah, you've got a cash buyer, that seller's title company is gonna do all the work. Because your buyer is not borrowing money, they don't need title insurance. And so the seller's title company will take care of closing. And they're the ones that are gonna send your buyer wire instructions for them to be able to wire money to that title company when it's ready to close. They'll have those documents for a buyer when you have one that is cash
So
only.
that's why you have to always use one title company for that.
right,
When
because
you
there's
have
not
a
being,
cash
there's, when you're doing a cash buyer, unless it's hard money,
Well then,
where you're issuing a policy, then you can't split it, you have to use the seller's title company.
Yeah.
And then sometimes that's where you struggle with your relationships, because really it comes down to relationships that you have with your title people and who you trust, and then all of a sudden you have to use somebody that maybe isn't as ethical as somebody that you currently
Yeah.
use on a regular basis.
or non-responsive, or
Sure, I know, and that can be really frustrating.
Carrie, this is what's happening, can I help you?
And it happens from time to time where we've got a listing, we've got an agent that's like, hey man, we're ready to go, and they just didn't know that because they're buying cash or paying cash, and we don't know until we see the rep sheet and it just says like balance due at closing is the.
And that's why a lot of times when you're dealing with builders too, you have to use their title company because their contract specifically states that you do in order to get the best benefits for your borrower.
We want to help with I honestly do want to help with every transaction, every deal. And just on the way over here, Carrie said something that I've always lived by too, like, listen, we always take it personal when we can work on your deal, or we're not going to take it personal when we can't work on your deal because it has to go to another title company because you've got a cash buyer or they're buying new construction. Make your deals happen and close your deals. If we can help,
need our help, let us know.
let us know, yeah.
Yeah, we're happy to
So we'll
help with
always,
whatever you
yeah,
need.
call, text, email, having a title person in your email, that auto-populates, exactly how to get to them is very important, so I'm sure that if you guys have closed a bunch of deals, there's somebody who you already work with title, and that's awesome. I'm sure they're doing a great job. If you ever need anything though, some weird closing out of town, even if you've got a buyer or seller that's with a different title company, I'm not supposed to, but just let us know.
I've actually done mobile notaries for other title companies
About it.
because my client doesn't necessarily like the people they're dealing with, so I'll do it. But I'll do a mobile signing for somebody.
Yep. No
Anytime.
problem. Yeah.
For sure.
yeah, she will. I can attest to that.
There you go. Yeah, I bet. Yeah. Over the years, it's easy to abuse your title buddy. That's
Just-
right. It's like,
Oh,
hey, close this on Saturday at 7 at night.
Let's be fair. When you're not available, you'll let me know,
I will.
and you'll do your best to arrange somebody else to sacrifice.
That's right. We're there. And we've got an office. We've got an office just down the street on 6600 South and 13th East. I got another office in Pleasant Grove. So if you've got clients anywhere, but again,
Ooh.
you got something.
Can I ask a weird unrelated question?
Yeah.
Sure.
Why is it called Highland Title?
I
If it's
asked
not
Robert, the
on,
owner of that. When
Well,
he was
I
like,
actually thought it was because he went to Highland High School, but he says not. We
Is
don't
it a
really
Scottish
know.
thing then? Or?
We don't know.
All right, I'm like,
He just-
it's not on Highland Drive, and like typically speaking.
No, I know, I thought that too. Robert, the owner, he's just like a big brother to me. He's just like helped me with so much stuff throughout my life, and I've just always kind of been there. I started as the delivery driver just 17 years ago, and here I am now, closing transactions and things like that years later. But yeah, when he decided to open his own title company, I was like, what the hell, man? White, green, white, and then we changed to black, and all of a sudden Bob's just like, I don't know, it just Highland Title sounded good.
I always just thought it was because he went to Highland High School.
Yeah.
Change our name to 4500 real estate.
No, we call it Highland Real Estate because we're close enough.
We're just off that new kind of like Fifth South exit, I
Okay.
think, that new kind of like in,
In the strip areas there.
yeah.
Mhm.
So we're in a building.
It's really easy to get there.
Yeah, it is.
We
It's just
came
off-
from there, so
Oh, yeah.
did ya?
Nice.
we,
Yeah.
and on that freeway entrance.
You know where that Evermore Park is? It's like a.
You don't know where the
it's like
Causeway Park is?
The cosplay, yeah, it's
No,
like
that
we're
was
on the
the
other
Hard
side
Knock.
of the
That's right.
You don't,
cosplay
you
park.
know where the, what do
The
they call
Utah Fertility Center, you don't pass that? I know it really well. I'm very-
Oh, yeah.
Very much better.
I
Anyway,
have a friend
it?
Yeah, very good.
Got a friend that needs
that
some help.
goes there. I had to drive him there one time.
Oh, very good. Nice. Well, hey, man, we're expecting our second from Utah Fertility. But anyway, we're right next to their big building. It says Intercap Lending on it.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah, yeah.
Me and Josh are on your bros.
Yeah.
Very good.
There you go, there you go.
So,
Yeah. Is there any other questions or?
yeah,
Does
it
You
that
guys
pay
can-
off, oh, sorry, Roger.
does.
Does that payoff form still ask for a social security number?
It does.
Can we change that to just ask for the last four?
Love it. And we do our best. Dude, I don't even want
However,
wet signatures. Some of these
some-
lenders still ask for wet signatures. And we
It
try to
just
start with
depends
the
on
fact
the
that-
lender, depends
That's
on the
it.
lender on whether we can use the last four of the social, we can start that way.
I have paranoid
and-
clients.
Yes.
I'm paranoid, like, I will
Well,
not
we
get that from
actually
my
do
clients, 'cause I don't want their
have,
social.
we have a
Sure.
program, it's called
I have
Closing
them
Lock,
before
that we
directly.
can send the
Okay.
form through for them to fill out, and it's a secure,
Oh, yeah.
it's a secure
Yeah.
portal where it comes back to us. So we do have some of those options, and actually Matt was just telling me today, that we're in the process of doing a new programming that has like DocuSign, what was the other things you were saying in it?
So have you heard of a remote online notary, Ron? And so people that are like, hey man, I'm selling my house, but I'm in Guam. You can literally do remote online notaries that way. And so this service that we use,
So it kind of was gonna
they,
combine.
you know, that's a service that we would have to provide. This new software, I'll just allow it so that when we do the remote online notary, it pops up and hey, there's me communicating with your client, going through these documents, and then I can remote online notary that and then submit it and get it recorded to the state. So that's some new technology and some new stuff that started because of COVID, because people just weren't traveling to do closings and things needed to be done outside. Listen, lenders on a purchase still want wet signatures on their notes. And because of that, if they want one wet signature, let's just wet sign them all and do a closing. But on a sale, if there is a document that needs to be notarized, those things can be done online. So if you ever have anything that needs to be done with a notary, let me know and I can help facilitate those things with your client if they're out of state. And they, you know, I mean, most of the time you can go to a UPS store and there's a notary at every UPS store and they can notarize a document right there and you can FedEx it to us and we'll get it the next day. But sometimes when people are out of the country on a sale, you know, those are things that I can do.
When they'd have to go to the consulate to get,
And
Or
they
the
don't have-
embassy,
I know,
yeah.
and for those, you know.
But
2
yes,
years
there
of
is
consulate
some
close.
software that we can use where it's a little bit more secure, or
Yeah.
we can always call the borrower or seller directly and ask them to get that to us over the phone verbally as well.
Yeah,
So we can start with the last four, but
sometimes the lender
it
comes to
just
ask.
depends on what we're dealing with.
These have something else like that.
no, only Highland Title.
Oh, yeah, listen.
Only Highland, no.
Listen,
We're the best.
they should,
Okay.
they
Yeah,
should,
if your title company doesn't have a lot of different options for things like that, they need to get them.
yeah, absolutely.
And then with HOA docs,
Yeah.
when you're working with a buyer, like my buyer had an escrow officer they wanted to work with,
Cool.
so like that was kind
Sweet.
of rare, I guess, I hear.
Love it.
But they didn't have HOA docs, only the seller, the
Mhm.
sellers. Is that common?
Well, the seller's the one that's supposed to provide them to
Yes,
the
the
buyer.
contract requires that the seller provide those. So if
Yeah.
any
Now, as
agent's
far
like,
as the
here, go get
CCNRs
them,
though,
tell them to go be nice to themselves and that their seller is required to provide those documents to the buyer as per the contract. That's just an agent trying to make you do their job for them.
Right,
It was nerve-wracking, because
Yeah,
I
that's
wasn't
nice.
sure like how many documents there were supposed to be.
So it
You know,
depends. So there are specific documents that you have to go through, like HomeWise and all that to get as far as like their minutes and stuff. But if it's CCNRs, those are public records, and so any escrow, they should be able to provide that for you. But like Keith said, that really is the responsibility of the sellers title company and agent to provide those upfront.
Especially as HomeWise will try to charge you as the agent,
Right.
whereas they cannot charge the seller.
It's illegal for them to charge the seller.
That's
documents.
Right.
So it is.
Well, HomeWise still
They
charges
still
the seller
charge,
because
yeah.
you still have to go through the HomeWise or HOA Living or whoever is their servicer, in order to get the current documentation as far as whether they're current and whatnot.
It's not $25 here, $25 there.
Yeah.
They charge you.
But
So the
again,
seller's responsible.
But again, the seller's responsible for providing all of those, and if the agent tries to be like, well, you can just call the HOA, just shut it down.
Say, no, you need to provide that.
Just say, the contract states that the seller will provide those documents, not that they'll provide me a phone number. And you can be as mean as be like, do your job.
And they say, oh, well, I put them on the MLS.
No.
There's also, with that, if you're representing the seller and you have an HOA, some of the HOAs are now also requiring a specific authorization to be signed and executed in order for them to give the information through the HomeWise as well. So it's based off of the HOA each individually. Some of them do, some of them don't.
And it's, getting signed authorizations on things like that. Like, if I were to give this to you to give to your client, I mean, it sucks to have to deal with hard copies and stuff. I don't know how they would print it off, but even if they signed it in wet ink and just took a good picture and sent it to us, that's something that lenders are taking. Trying to get people to just do things e-signed is something that we're really trying to move towards, especially with the fact that there's legislation so we can do recorded notarized documents. I'm hoping and crossing my fingers that some of these lenders are gonna start becoming a little bit cooler with just.
Right, and allowing the e-signatures.
So, another thing is, really quick though, I'm still seeing some revsies that come in with like, hey, $500 towards a home warranty. Ibex even, they're like $600 now. So most home warranties and if you've got a home warranty buddy that you work with, make sure that you just know how much their home warranties are, because it is kind of a bummer to get to closing and it's like, wait a minute, someone's still gotta come in with another $100 to pay for a $600 closing or home warranty when they only wrote $500 on there. So there's just some other weird things.
Because they've been 500 for how many years now?
Yeah, now it's up to 600, yeah, a lot of them are 600. Some of them still offer the 500,
Yeah.
like Silverback
Silverback,
offers a
Yes.
500, Landmark,
Silverback.
and I am a big fan of Silverback, I like Silverback a lot, but.
I like Jason a
I
lot,
think
but I haven't had to use Silverback for anything.
How about under 600?
Yeah.
You don't like
I think it's
Jason?
probably good marketing.
Oh, I just like the owner. He's a good friend. Every home warranty company, at some point, you have to have an in. Like at some point, we've had to call Chad with Ibex a number of times, and Ibex has like a great
Well,
reputation. You still have to, sometimes you have to grease the wheels.
Like
So
Landmark.
if you have a problem with Silverback, talk to me, and I'll get you in touch with Jason. Like the
Also,
owner
I've
and I
had
are
where
tight.
borrowers have wanted to use like a
It's
national
always
title
that way. When you
company
think
or a
it's not, it
national
always
warranty
ends up that way.
company. They charge tax on that, just so you know, it's not a flat fee. So, and then people don't wanna pay their tax, so they don't get a,
Okay.
anyway, but so some of the nationals do require
So
additional
you-
fees
you-
on top of it.
You're holding all of those. So like, as agents, what are we wanting to be looking for when we're looking over the PR?
Okay.
And how can we explain that stuff to our clients? Because I know that's
This
one
one
of the
right
bigger
here, that's the
questions.
one with the bankruptcy. That one's got some good stuff on it.
So basically you have 4 parts to a title commitment. There's the jacket, which basically is giving you all of what's covered and what's not covered, which is generally the first 4 pages. Schedule A gives you all of the basic information about the property. How much your policy premiums are, who's the owner of the property, the tax ID number, the address, and the legal description is usually on Schedule A. Schedule B, Part 1, is the requirements for the title company to ensure the transaction. So these are the things that we have to make sure are done in order for us to issue that policy, which in this case, because there's a bankruptcy, there's judgments, there's also a loan that needs to be paid off. Basically, it's stating what we need to make sure that we gather that information and get those approvals prior to. Schedule B2 basically is showing you what is against the property. The first few, these basically it states up here that upon issuing of the policy, these no longer apply, but it's basically talking about like mining minerals and that kind of stuff. So basically where generally you want to start with is where it states what the property taxes are. In most cases, on our commitments, it's usually number 8 or number 9. And anything after that is what you're going to have to address in order for the policy to be issued. So it's showing where the trust deed is, what the judgments are, and the bankruptcy, that it falls under the bankruptcy. So the Schedule B2 is really what's going to give you the detailed information that you're going to want to look at. And then what Jessica does in her emails, when she sends that out to you, she points out these are the things that we need to address in order for us to ensure the transaction. So she gives you a quick overview.
And if you can't overcome one of those, the buyer will get their earnest money back because the seller says in the contract they're conveying clear and marketable title.
Correct.
Even if it was, it's not
Well,
even
if you've
hard.
modified the contract, have earnest money be hard for all, never put earnest money hard in an addendum, by the way, guys. The term is non-refundable. Hard earnest money doesn't mean anything legally.
Right.
Anyhow, but if you are going to have non-refundable earnest money, you need to make sure that you're still leaving certain aspects of the contract in place, like 16.2 and 20.2. It doesn't address title as a default situation, but if the seller can't sell the home, they're the ones who, like, if they're getting hard about it, follow.
Before it even,
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Well, if they get hard about it and like start trying to push back, just follow all the way through, finish your closing. The seller cannot close, therefore they will have defaulted by not being able
Well,
to
and in
complete
most
closing.
cases, we can overcome whatever is on the commitment. You may just have to adjust realistic timeframes,
There's
kind of thing.
So you'll want to start talking about extending.
Yes.
Right, right. And the seller's agent, like if you're dealing with a bankruptcy, they should be being upfront to you if you're representing the buyer. Hey, we're looking at having approval from the trustee approximately at this time, or we're waiting on the judgment payoff by this time. So really, they should be being realistic in what their expectations are of you guys when you're dealing with the buyer's side. Seller's side, it makes it a little more difficult because you're the one that's giving that phone call and saying, hey, we can't do this until this time frame. So it just really depends on, your communication with whoever you're dealing with for the buyer and the seller. And that sometimes can be more difficult than others, so.
I like that too,
Other
where
agents.
it's like, we can overcome the things that are listed that need to be done. It just may take a minute, but.
And it also comes down to, is your sellers willing to do what needs to be done in order to overcome it?
Right.
Because sometimes you're gonna run into a seller that says, I refuse to pay that. And then therein, you've got the out with your buyer to save their earnest money because they're not willing to give them clear title. Make sense?
Yeah.
When you buy a property and you buy an owner's policy, if they go dark and there's still a lien in place, what is the governing body that you go to? Is that the Division of Real Estate or?
So that's where that jacket comes into place. When the policy is issued that they're getting that final jacket, it will tell you how to file a claim for that specific underwriter in that jacket. So if you run into that case and if you contact your escrow officer and they're not willing to help you, that's where you go. Is you go to that underwriter and you file a claim with that underwriter, because then the underwriter makes the escrow company provide proof that they did what they were supposed to do and therefore take care of that prior lien type thing.
Okay.
One thing I like to say to buyers in a closing is, this owner's policy is gonna show up in your mail in the next 45, 60 days. And it has the actual recorded warranty deed signed by the sellers transferring ownership to you. And then that 10 pages of that insurance policy stating that everything's free and clear.
That's something you don't want to throw away. You
No.
want to keep that forever.
And listen, if something does get misplaced or thrown away, we all just keep this stuff electronically. So, we can always get you copies of the things that have been signed or closing documents or anything you give us. A lot of real estate agents and lenders use this as their file system. Whenever they've got something that needs to be included into their file, they just send it to us to just make sure that everything is in place for their closing.
If we do hard money loans, do we want to require a specific lending policy?
I would say that if you're doing the loan, you want to still have a lender's policy because it still protects you as the hard money lender.
Any specifics that are,
Well, you're getting ownership or position insured. And so it also protects you from any prior liens and stuff, as far as that could threaten your position as first lien position as a lender. And it also, you have the same option to be able to file a claim against that lender's policy.
Yeah, I would think that, like hard money lenders, that's probably a requirement for a lot of them, is they're like, we're getting a loan policy.
well, I'm lending out too, but I'm newer
Very
to that.
Oh, very
Yeah,
good, yeah.
Yeah, I would always
requiring
protect
a loan.
yourself,
Yes.
just simply because it just gives you that added layer of protection in the event that they default on the
Yeah.
loan, kind of thing. That you've got that policy or something's fishy and, you know what I'm saying, something doesn't get done. Because in most cases, hard money lenders are just using whatever title company the borrower wants. And so you may or may not have the same level of comfort with who you're dealing with unless you decide, nope, we're only going to use my title company. And then you develop that relationship with your escrow officer. Okay,
Yeah, thanks.
anything else?
I have a lot of questions about the title report, but I feel like I can
Okay.
hang back and ask.
Okay.
Well, cause I don't wanna bog everybody down with my questions, but every time I see one, I like panic sets in, I don't understand it, I feel like I'm looking at different language basically.
Well, it is.
Yeah, so there was one recently where the buyers came back with child support tax
Yeah,
liens.
sure.
But it was actually someone else with the same name.
Right, that's where that clearing comes in.
Yes.
And it was like in the middle of the report. So it was like going through the definitions or schedule 1 or?
Schedule B.
Schedule B, section 2 is generally where that would be
Yeah.
behind your trustee.
Yeah, and so like, as I'm going through these things and we're looking, I wanna see where taxes start. This one actually is 2 parcels, so, excuse me, it's 1.
Did you say like most pertinent information will start at 8 usually?
Yeah, usually about number 8.
Okay.
Yeah, and then like, there is your trustee, and then, hey, look, here's where the federal tax lien is, and then there's a judgment, and so that's where there's gonna be some ORS stuff, and it is kinda tough, like, we do point that stuff out, and that's where someone asked earlier, like, does it take a while to clear these things? Listen, sometimes, if John Smith has said that John Smith owes child support for this, we can get that and we can clear that very quickly, but it is
Usually
something
it's
that will
just
show up
social,
there.
We just need the full social security
Yes.
number in order to get that, to
Yeah.
confirm
Which is
whether
so
it
easy.
belongs to them
Yeah.
or not. The other real tricky one, if you've ever dealt with a property in West Valley, West Valley is famous for filing notices of non-compliance for weed and debris. Sometimes those recordings will happen prior to your trust deed, and it doesn't necessarily jump out at you. But like I said, with Jessica's going through our commitment, she's trying to point that information out. With the notices of non-compliance, basically it could be a permit issue, it could be weed and debris, but West Valley is probably the one city that files those pretty regularly. So we just have to jump through to find out what it is that's needed in order to get that cleared up. Sometimes it's a fee that has to be paid through closing, and the seller or borrower, depending on who's going to be responsible for that, generally the seller would take care of that for you. But that one's a sneaky one that comes up a lot.
Yeah, and we send you that PR, and then maybe your deal doesn't close for 45 or 60 days or however long. After signing, the first thing that we do is we send something to our title searcher that just says, hey, this one's gonna fund a report tomorrow, any prior or anything listed on
They're
there.
gonna let us know if anything's been recorded from the effective date of your title commitment.
Yes, we just wanna
If
make sure that,
there's anything new.
yeah, like over the past, last week, someone who never did get paid to redo the roof or something, then they put the lien on the property, that'll show up, and then we've got to talk to those sellers and be like, hey, you said that nothing was owed on the property and that there were no liens or construction work that's been done and unpaid. Well, this one just showed up that was unpaid, so, and then we just have to take care of it at closing or at funding and recording.
But if you have a specific thing that if you want to go over in more detail, I'm happy to help you with that,
Sure.
Matt as well.
Divorce things come up too, and that'll show, like if they filed for divorce, that'll show up in the PR, you know what I mean? And then there's instructions that have to be followed for how proceeds are gonna be split out and things like that. And so, yeah, listen, I love my job. You real estate agents, man, you guys got the tough job. My real estate agents make my life much easier. So I don't have to have the conversations with some of like the buyers and sellers. But if you do need me to have the conversation with one of your buyers or sellers, I'm always cool to talk to them as well. I just know that sometimes agents and lenders, it's my client, I will speak to them. And I've got some clients that are like, will you just talk to this person to get them to understand? So
At
those are
this
things that
point,
we
that's
can
exactly what I'm doing, because
That's-
I don't know what's going on. I don't want
it's
to
very
take
interesting.
responsibility for that.
So,
So I want to circle back to the, what you were saying in terms of, doing the notary
yes,
outside of the state.
yeah,
I've
The
had,
Ron?
The Ron,
yeah, I've had clients in Mexico that sometimes have to drive more than 3 hours to get to a Mexican consulate to,
yes.
sign over a property. Do you guys do that in Mexico?
Yes.
yes.
Okay, they're gonna need to do some identity verification, and then they're also gonna need like a valid passport. Nothing expired, you can't use expired passports or driver's licenses, things like that. But they also need to have good internet and the ability to video chat. And so those things are gonna be the
The
three
key
most
things in
important
order to be able to use
Yeah.
the online notary
Are we
services.
good in Central and South America?
We're good anywhere there's an internet connection that they can qualify themselves.
Because
for
it's still being
verification
considered
purposes.
as if they're in our office, signing in the States, even though they're out of country.
Right, they're proving to us that they are who they say they are. And by seeing and understanding and being on that video chat, they know the document that they're signing. And then having the certification through the state allowing us to be able to do a remote online closing gives us the ability to do that and have that recorded. But one of the things that they have to do is the verification. There's like 5 verification questions like, have you lived at this property address in the past
They
5
always
years?
fail.
And
My
that,
Hispanic clients
Dude.
always fail.
that's a bummer.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that now we're changing the software where we're gonna have a little bit more control over some of those things because the software and the service that we used, if you failed the questions, then you were immediately locked out for 24 hours and you wouldn't be able to re-sign, so.
That's good to know.
But yeah, the
But yes,
important thing when you're
that's
doing
the
stuff.
positive about the Ron is that it's as if they're in our office,
Yes.
even though they're out of country.
Yeah.
And so that removes all of those requirements of out of the country, trying to find a US notary in order for them to be done. But the other thing is if you can't do it that way, you can use a local notary for wherever they're at. They just have to be able to provide a translated notary statement in English to go with their whatever the language is that their notary documentation is to attach to it. So if we can have the English and then the notary has to sign and stamp it as well as the actual document that they're signing. So there is ways around if you're not able to use the RON in order for the county to accept the out-of-country notary. So there are ways around that.
And you guys have Spanish speaking?
Yeah, we've got a Spanish-speaking escrow officer,
Who's that?
Jason.
Oh, Jason. Good to know. I did not know that.
Tacos.
I have my escrow officer that I work with all the time, I love her.
Good.
She's so meticulous
Good.
about everything that she does, and she's amazing.
Good.
But I still have yet to find somebody that can do the paperwork in Spanish and like actually use the correct terms, cause like I can translate, but
Sure.
it's better coming from somebody that actually knows, the terminology.
Let us know. I mean, if you've got a buyer or borrower or a seller, and you're just going to need those documents explained in another language, just let me know. We'll get that, yeah, no problem. So, yeah, the remote online notary thing again, yeah, gotta have, I mean, you gotta be kind of savvy with like computers and software, you know, but yeah, you've gotta be able to have good internet signal and then a video chat. And then you gotta pass those verification questions, and some of them are silly, like, yeah, what was your first cat's name? I don't know how those are like known, but there are some like known questions that you have to be able to answer. Provide a valid passport and or a valid driver's
Well,
license.
hopefully I won't have to do it again, but.
Yeah, dude, I know those are tough.
There are
Yeah,
options,
sure.
there are
Yeah,
options
yeah,
out there.
yeah.
Anything else?
We're great gophers, so if you ever need anything weird, let us know.
Yeah, for sure.
I have a couple of cards too. I mean, if anybody does business cards, I mean, it's what I look like in a blue shirt. So if you guys need anything, just shoot me a text or email me or something like that. Yeah.